In October 2021, a boy was born in Cebu. His father held him in the delivery room, couldn't speak for several minutes, then looked at the mother and said, "He looks like you." She smiled. He cried. They named him Lucas. 8 months later, the father asked to put his name on the birth certificate. And that's when everything fell apart. Not because he did anything wrong, not because she was deliberately deceiving him, but because the Philippines has a law that most foreigners don't know exists until they're already inside it. What that law is, and how it destroyed the life of a man who simply wanted to be a father, you'll understand by the end of this story. Stay until the final chapter. There's something there that could save you, and not just your money.
Daniel Hoffman was 44 years old when he first flew to the Philippines. Swiss guy from Basel, software engineer working remotely for a German company. Good income, complete freedom of movement. The kind of person people call a digital nomad, though Daniel hated that word. He just wanted to live somewhere he actually liked. And he liked Asia. He'd already spent a year in Thailand, 6 months in Vietnam. Southeast Asia suited him. The climate, the cost of living, the pace. Europe felt to him like an office you couldn't leave. His personal life was, as he put it, on pause. Relationships in Switzerland always ended because he kept leaving. Women didn't want to live out of a suitcase. He understood them. He just couldn't bring himself to change either. In February 2020, he flew to Cebu. Planned to stay 3 months. Stayed 3 years.
He didn't meet Rosa Santos in a bar or through an app. He'd rented an apartment in a small condo in Cebu's IT Park district. Modern area. Coffee shops, co-working spaces, young people with laptops everywhere. Rosa worked the front desk in the same building. For the first 2 weeks, just polite hellos. Then one afternoon, the elevator got stuck between floors for 20 minutes. The two of them were inside. They started talking. He found out she read the same books he did, Scandinavian crime novels. She found out he was a programmer who couldn't stand Zoom calls. When the elevator finally got fixed, they were both a little disappointed. A week later, he asked her for coffee. She said yes. Rosa was 32, small, very upright posture. She laughed rarely, but when she did, it was real. Calm, self-possessed. She wasn't one of those women who light up around a foreign man. If anything, she kept her distance. That was exactly what drew him in. He said later, "She was the only one who wasn't trying to impress me. She was just herself. That's rare."
We need to stop here and talk about Rosa separately. Rosa grew up in Bohol Province, a beautiful island south of Cebu, known for its quiet rural life. Her family wasn't wealthy, but they were stable. Her father was a school teacher. Her mother kept the house. 3 kids. Rosa was the middle child. At 23, she got married. His name was Edgar. Local guy, worked construction. The first few years were fine. Then Edgar started drinking. Not catastrophically, just steadily. Debt piled up. Money for the household ran out. At 27, Rosa left for Cebu. Alone. Without Edgar. She just left because staying was impossible. But she couldn't divorce him. This is the thing most foreigners don't understand until it personally affects them.
The Philippines is the only country in the world, apart from Vatican City, where divorce does not exist in civil law. There is annulment, a long, expensive, complicated court procedure. Most people whose marriages have practically ended simply live separately for years, for decades. Officially, still husband and wife. Rosa was exactly in that situation. She lived in Cebu. Edgar lived in Bohol. They hadn't spoken in 5 years. In her own mind, she had not been married for a long time. She didn't tell Daniel. At first, she didn't think it mattered. They were just dating. And then it became too hard to start that conversation. They dated for 6 months before they moved in together. Daniel later said those were the best 6 months of his life. Not because everything was perfect, but because it was real. Rosa didn't perform, didn't put on a show. She argued with him, had her own opinions, sometimes said, "You're wrong. Here's why." He valued that more than anything. The 2020 lockdown caught them together. Cebu shut down in March. They ended up in his apartment for several months. That was a real test, and they passed it. Cooked together, worked at desks side by side, watched movies at night. When the lockdown ended, the idea of her moving back was never discussed. Daniel found a bigger place. Rosa brought her things. Her family knew about Daniel. Her mother accepted him, quietly, without warmth or hostility. Her father held back at first. Then they found common ground over chess. Daniel played well. The father noticed. Daniel felt like part of a family. A real one. For the first time. In early 2021, Rosa told him she was pregnant. Daniel later described that moment like this. "I was sitting in the kitchen with coffee. She walked in, set the test on the table, and just looked at me. I looked at the test, then at her. Then I stood up and held her. That was all that needed to happen." He was happy. Genuinely happy. He was 45. He'd always assumed that kids weren't part of his kind of life. But in that moment, he understood. No. This was what he wanted. They started preparing. Daniel set up a nursery, bought everything they'd need, began learning Cebuano, the local dialect of Cebu, so the baby would hear both languages from birth. Rosa saw a good doctor throughout. Daniel paid for every visit. In October of 2021, their son was born. They named him Lucas. Daniel was in the delivery room, held Rosa's hand through all of it. When they placed the baby in his arms,
He couldn't speak for several minutes. He called it the happiest moment of his life. The first months with Lucas were hard and beautiful at the same time. Sleep deprivation, colic, endless night shifts. But also the first smile, the first sounds. Lucas recognized Daniel's voice before he could focus his eyes. Daniel cut his work hours, took fewer projects. He felt it financially. He didn't think about it. Rosa recovered. Daniel took the night shifts himself, let her sleep. In the mornings, they'd have coffee on the balcony while Lucas slept. Watch the city. Talk about nothing in particular. Those were good mornings. A few months after Lucas was born, Daniel started thinking more seriously about the future. He wanted to officially establish paternity, not for legal reasons, just this was his son. It needed to be on record. One evening, when Lucas was asleep, he brought it up with Rosa. Rosa was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "We need to talk." 8 months of happiness. A child. A home. Plans for the future. And then we need to talk. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, now's the time. We tell stories like this one every week. And we're just getting to the part Daniel didn't see coming. Rosa told him everything that evening. About Edgar, about the marriage in 2016, about the fact that they hadn't lived together in 5 years, but were still, officially, husband and wife. Daniel listened without a word. When she finished, he stood up, walked out to the balcony, and lit a cigarette. He hadn't smoked in 3 years. Then he came back inside, sat down, asked quietly, "Why didn't you tell me from the beginning?" She answered honestly, "At first, I didn't think it would go this far. Then, I didn't know how to say it. Then I was afraid of losing you." Daniel looked at her for a long time. On one hand, he'd lived with this woman for more than a year and a half. He knew her. She wasn't a liar by nature. This wasn't a scheme. It was a human situation that went further than she expected. On the other hand, he had a son he couldn't officially recognize because the baby's mother was legally married to another man. He asked, "What do we need to do to fix this?" Rosa explained. The procedure is called annulment, not divorce. The Philippines doesn't have divorce. Annulment is a court ruling that a marriage was invalid from the very beginning. You have to prove it. Psychological incapacity of one spouse, fraud at the time of marriage, abuse, or a handful of other specific grounds. This is not a formality. This is a full court proceeding. Cost: between $9,000 and $18,000. Timeline: 3 to 7 years, sometimes longer. Outcome? Not guaranteed. The next morning, Daniel went to see a lawyer, a family law specialist in Cebu, experienced with situations involving foreigners. The lawyer laid out the full picture.
Regarding Lucas, a child born to a woman in an official marriage is by default considered the husband's child. Daniel could file an affidavit of acknowledgement of paternity, technically possible, gives him partial rights. But the legal husband, Edgar, held legal priority. Regarding annulment, the process could proceed without Edgar's participation, but it would take significantly longer. The court would need to locate him, notify him, wait for a response. Add 1 to 2 years to an already long process. Regarding Daniel's visa, tourist status in the Philippines extends through the Bureau of Immigration. No need to leave the country. That wasn't the problem. The problem was that tourist status gave Daniel no stable legal footing as a father. Long-term residency required marriage to a citizen, which was impossible while Rosa was still married to Edgar. Daniel left the lawyer's office and walked along the waterfront for a long time. He needed to think.
Daniel decided to fight. He hired a lawyer for Rosa, filed the annulment paperwork. First payment, around $8,000. Attorney's retainer, court filing fees, the mandatory psychological evaluation required by law. At the same time, he filed the affidavit of paternity for Lucas. That went through. Technically, the boy was now officially recognized as his son. But with conditions Daniel didn't fully understand yet. Then he reached out to Edgar directly, got his number through Rosa's relatives. The conversation was short.
Edgar said he had no objection to the annulment. He didn't consider himself married either. But actually participating, coming to Cebu for hearings, signing documents, dealing with courts, he had no time for that. "That's your business, not mine," he said, and hung up. Without Edgar's participation, everything slowed down further. The lawyer said minimum 2 more years. The first hearing was scheduled 10 months after the filing, then postponed again. The judge went on maternity leave. The case was transferred to a new judge who had to review all the materials from scratch. By the time Lucas turned 1 year old, they had completed 1 hearing out of roughly 15 required. Daniel stayed in Cebu. Lucas was growing, already pulling himself up along the furniture, saying his first words in Cebuano. He called Daniel Dada. In the mornings, he'd climb into bed and fall asleep on Daniel's shoulder. That was what mattered most. But around that main thing, everything else was accumulating. Financially, Daniel was carrying everything himself. Rent, food, Lucas's expenses, legal fees. Rosa went back to work when Lucas was 4 months old, but her salary covered about 20% of their total costs. Work. He was taking less of it. First, intentionally. He wanted to be present. Then he didn't have the energy or the focus for full-time work with everything else going on.
court process was moving. The lawyer said, normally. Daniel asked what normally meant. The lawyer said, it means it's moving.
By Lucas's second birthday, Daniel had spent around $30,000 on the whole situation. One evening, when Lucas was asleep, Daniel sat on the balcony, looking at the lights of Cebu below. Rosa came out, stood beside him. Long silence. Then she said, "Are you thinking about leaving?" He paused, then said, "I'm thinking about the fact that I don't want to leave, but I can't live like this forever." She nodded, said nothing. That was the first truly honest conversation they'd had in months.
In year 3, Daniel discovered that Lucas couldn't leave the Philippines without the consent of both legal parents. He wanted to bring his son to Switzerland, to meet his grandparents, to establish Swiss citizenship that Lucas was entitled to as the son of a Swiss national. For a Filipino child to travel internationally, you need consent from the father named in the documents. The legal father in the Philippine records was Edgar. Daniel called Edgar again. This time, Edgar picked up and named his price. For his signature on the travel consent and his participation in the annulment process, $4,000. Daniel paused, then asked, "Do you understand that we're talking about a child?" Edgar said, "I understand. 4,000. And this is not a unique story. It happens constantly. Men in similar situations report paying anywhere from $1,000 to $10,000 for a signature, for consent, for the right to have a man who hasn't been a husband or father in years officially stop being one on paper. Daniel paid. Edgar signed, agreed to the annulment, and disappeared again. Lucas flew to Basel when he was 2 years and 8 months old. His grandparents held him and couldn't stop crying. Daniel watched them and didn't know what he felt. Happiness and grief at the same time. In Basel, Daniel met up with his old friend Matthias. They hadn't seen each other in almost 3 years. Lucas was asleep in the next room at Daniel's parents' house. Matthias looked at the closed door, then at Daniel. "He's incredible," he said. Daniel nodded, didn't say anything. Then Matthias asked, "Do you have regrets?" Daniel didn't answer right away. About Lucas? No. Never. Not for a second. About Rosa? No. She's a good person. She made a mistake. I could have asked the right question myself. I didn't. I regret that I didn't know. That no one warned me that this country has a law that turns your personal life
into someone else's legal problem. I regret the years spent in court over a process that wouldn't exist if there were a normal divorce law. I regret the money I paid to a man I've never met for the right to take my own son to the country he's a citizen of. Matthias was quiet for a moment, then asked, "When do you fly back?" Daniel said, 2 weeks. Rosa's waiting. That was all that needed to be said.
Let's talk about the system, not to blame anyone, just to understand what's actually happening. The Philippines has no divorce. This is not a travel blog myth. This is a legal fact. The only country in the world, besides Vatican City, where divorce does not exist as a legal procedure. That means a huge number of Filipino women are officially married, not because they're hiding it out of malice. Many of them consider their marriages long over. They haven't lived with their husbands in years. They don't think of them as husbands. But on paper, married. Forever. Until a court says otherwise. Second, annulment is not just expensive and slow, it's unpredictable. Average cost? $10,000 to $20,000. Average timeline? 3 to 7 years. Judges go on maternity leave. Cases get transferred. Hearings get postponed. And the Edgars of the world pick up the phone and name their price. And even if the court grants the annulment, the Catholic Church doesn't recognize it. In a country where 70% of the population are practicing Catholics, that carries real social weight.
Third, children in this situation are their own legal story entirely. A child born to a woman in an official marriage is legally the husband's child by default, not the biological father's. A foreign man can file an affidavit of paternity. It helps. It's not enough. As long as the mother is officially married to someone else, that someone else holds legal priority, including a say in whether the child can leave the country. Fourth, all of this creates a system where a foreign father depends on a man he's never met, on that man's goodwill, or on his asking price. This isn't a conspiracy. It's just the law of a country that, for religious reasons, cannot allow divorce. And it destroys the lives of people who didn't know. When Lucas turned 3, this was where things stood. The annulment was still in progress. Daniel was living in Cebu, working less than before, earning less, spending on legal fees what he'd once been setting aside for retirement. Lucas spoke 3 languages, Cebuano, Tagalog, and German. Could count to 20 in 2 of them. Loved dinosaurs. Was terrified of cockroaches. Called Daniel Poppy. With Rosa, they were still together. But it was different now. Not bad, just different. Tired. Like a marathon no one had planned to run.
Daniel once said to Matthias, "You know what's strange? I can't call it a mistake. Lucas isn't a mistake. Rosa isn't a mistake. The mistake was not asking one question. One simple question at the very beginning. And that question cost me several years of my life and several tens of thousands of dollars. Rosa said to him once, "You thought you fell in love with me, but you fell in love with the life here. I was part of it. Maybe those are different things." Daniel thought about that for a long time, then said, "No, I loved you. But you're right about something else. I didn't understand what it means to build a life in a country where you'll always be a foreigner."
This story isn't about Rosa being a bad person. She hid the marriage out of fear, not out of greed. Those are different motives, though the result is the same. And it's not about Daniel being naive or reckless. He did everything right, by the standards of a man who didn't know the specifics of the country. This is a story about a system, about a country with a unique legal framework that sets an invisible trap for anyone who doesn't know about it in advance. If you're thinking about a serious relationship with a Filipino woman, here are 5 things you need to do before you fall in love. Number 1, ask directly, have you ever been married? Not indirectly, not as a hint, directly. This isn't rude. It's necessary.
Number 2, ask her to show you her CENIMAR, the Certificate of No Marriage Record. This is an official document from the Philippine Statistics Authority. If a woman has never been married, this document exists, and it's not hard to get. Ask to see it. Number 3, if there was a marriage, clarify the legal status. Is the annulment complete? Is there a court ruling? Or is it just, we haven't lived together in years? Those are fundamentally different situations. Number 4, don't make major decisions, children, large financial commitments, until the legal status is clear. That's hard to hear, but it protects both of you. Number 5, if there's already a child, consult a local attorney and a lawyer in your home country at the same time. International family law is complex. Every month without the right paperwork makes the situation harder.
Daniel is in Cebu. Lucas is 3.5. The annulment is still in progress. Daniel says he doesn't regret his son. Never. Not for a second. But he adds, I didn't know what I didn't know, and that cost me more than I can say. If this story made you think, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you're not subscribed yet, now's the time. More stories like this one are coming. Real ones.